Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to guide you on a journey that transcends the boundaries of law and delves into the fragile core of human emotion. This is a story of resilience, heartbreak, and justice, told through the lens of a mother whose love knew no limits. What begins as an ordinary courtroom trial transforms into a shocking unraveling of secrets, a tale where every clue has the power to change lives forever. Judge Kate, known for her unwavering resolve, is confronted with a clue so profound that it shakes the very foundation of her being. A necklace worn by a defendant bears a chilling resemblance to one her daughter, Louise, was wearing the day she vanished 10 years ago. This object, seemingly innocuous, becomes the epicenter of a mystery layered with despair and the faint glimmer of hope. Before we dive into this gripping tale, I encourage you to take a moment and reflect. What would you do if confronted with a clue that could upend everything you knew about your past? If you find yourself moved by the depth of this story, do subscribe to this channel for more thought-provoking narratives. And as a gesture of connection, share an inspiring thought in the comments below, perhaps something like, "I embrace the courage to face life's mysteries with hope and compassion." Now, let us begin this extraordinary journey, chapter by chapter, uncovering a story of love, resilience, and the pursuit of truth. In a bustling courtroom filled with the familiar murmurs of anticipation, Judge Kate presided with her usual poise. The air was thick with tension. All eyes were on the young defendant, Caleb, whose fate hung in the balance. Accused of a series of petty thefts, Caleb appeared to be just another cog in the justice system. But as he shifted uneasily in his chair, something about him caught Kate's eye, a glimmer of silver peeking from beneath his shirt collar. At first, it was a mere distraction. A judge's role demands focus, a duty Kate carried out with meticulous discipline. Yet, the sight of that necklace awakened a memory so vivid that it felt as if no time had passed since that fateful day. The intricate pendant, a unique design of intertwined leaves and a small ruby centerpiece, was unmistakable. Her mind raced back to the morning Louise disappeared. She could see her daughter clearly in her mind's eye, wearing the necklace with pride, a birthday gift from her grandmother. Louise had been a vibrant, curious spirit, always chasing adventure. Kate recalled the uneasy feeling she had that day as Louise ran off to meet friends. That was the last time she saw her daughter. The courtroom's buzz faded into a distant hum as Kate's thoughts consumed her. Her pulse quickened, her hands trembled under the gavel's weight. Was it possible? Could Caleb hold the key to the mystery that had haunted her for a decade? Just as she began to steady her breathing, Caleb adjusted the necklace absent-mindedly, confirming her worst fears. It was the same necklace. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. Overwhelmed by a torrent of emotions, hope, despair, anger, her vision blurred, and she collapsed. Gasps filled the room as officers and clerks rushed to her aid. Caleb, visibly startled, stood frozen, his eyes darting from the necklace to the judge. What had started as a routine trial had now erupted into a scene of utter chaos. When Kate regained consciousness moments later, she found herself in the judge's chambers, surrounded by concerned colleagues. But her mind was elsewhere, consumed by the implications of what she had seen. Questions swirled relentlessly. How did Caleb come to possess the necklace? Could he know what happened to Louise? Was this a coincidence or a cruel twist of fate? Determined to maintain her composure, Kate re-entered the courtroom, but the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. Caleb's defense attorney, sensing the tension, asked for a recess. Kate granted it, her voice steady despite the emotional storm within. As the room emptied, she remained seated, her eyes fixed on Caleb's retreating figure. Every detail mattered now. His demeanor, his clothing, the way he carried himself, all potential clues. She resolved to dig deeper, no matter the cost. That evening, Kate pored over Louise's case file, her hands trembling as she flipped through pages of police reports and photographs. Every detail came flooding back: the search parties, the interviews, the sleepless nights spent wondering if her daughter was still alive. And now, a new chapter had begun, fueled by a single object that connected the past to the present. The next morning, she met with Detective Delroy Idolo, a seasoned investigator known for his unyielding methods. Sharing the details of her discovery, she made one thing clear. This was no ordinary case. It was personal. Delroy, intrigued by the mystery, agreed to take a closer look at Caleb's background. Their investigation began with a single thread, the necklace. Kate vividly described its unique design, providing photographs from Louise's childhood. Delroy promised to track its origin, starting with Caleb. Meanwhile, Kate wrestled with her dual roles as a judge and a mother. Could she remain impartial, or would her pursuit of truth compromise her duties? In the courtroom, the trial proceeded, but an undercurrent of tension loomed. Caleb seemed increasingly nervous, aware that the judge's eyes lingered on him with an intensity he couldn't escape. His attorney grew suspicious, questioning the impartiality of the proceedings. Behind the scenes, Delroy uncovered surprising connections. Caleb had a troubled past, bouncing between foster homes and struggling with the law. But his recent history revealed something more sinister, a network of associates linked to unsolved cases of missing persons. The necklace, it seemed, was just the beginning of a much larger story. As the pieces began to align, Kate found herself at a crossroads. Should she confront Caleb directly, or would doing so jeopardize her position and the trial? The line between justice and personal vengeance blurred, leaving her with more questions than answers. By the end of the week, Delroy uncovered a crucial lead, a pawnshop record indicating that Caleb had acquired the necklace from an enigmatic woman named Kristen. With this revelation, a new player entered the narrative, bringing with her more questions and fewer answers. Kate's world, once governed by order and logic, had become a maze of uncertainty. The necklace, once a painful reminder of loss, now held the promise of closure. But as she stared at the courtroom door, she knew the path ahead would not be easy. What role does Kristen play in this web of intrigue? What secrets does Caleb harbor? And how will they impact Kate's journey for truth? Stay with me as we unravel the next chapter, where the personal and professional collide in an intense battle for justice. From the moment Kate stepped back into the courtroom, the air seemed heavier. The once structured environment she had controlled for decades now felt unfamiliar, almost hostile. Her judicial robes, symbols of authority and impartiality, now seemed burdensome under the weight of personal turmoil. She was not just a judge presiding over Caleb's case. She was a mother desperate for answers. Caleb sat at the defense table, his posture slouched but his eyes alert. Each time he adjusted the necklace, it was as if he was unwittingly turning a key in Kate's mind, unlocking memories and fears she had long suppressed. The courtroom, a place where logic and order ruled, had become a battlefield for emotions she could no longer ignore. Her colleagues began to notice. Whispers of concern traveled through the legal community. Has Judge Kate lost her objectivity? They wondered. Some attributed her unease to exhaustion, while others speculated that the high-profile nature of the case had taken its toll. But no one could have guessed the truth. In private, Kate agonized over her next steps. The legal code she had upheld for years demanded neutrality, yet the mother in her screamed for action. Should she recuse herself from the trial? Doing so would protect her reputation, but it might also mean losing the chance to uncover what Caleb knew about Louise's disappearance. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, Kate found herself at Louise's old bedroom door. Dust motes danced in the air as she stepped inside. The room remained untouched, a time capsule of a young girl's life frozen at 13. Posters of pop stars adorned the walls, books lay stacked on the desk, and a jewelry box sat on the dresser. Kate opened the box, her fingers trembling. Inside lay a collection of trinkets, bracelets, and earrings, but the centerpiece was missing, the necklace. She had hoped against hope that somehow it would reappear here, as if Louise herself had returned. Instead, the emptiness was a cruel reminder of her loss. Determined not to let emotions cloud her judgment, Kate turned to Delroy Idolo for guidance. The detective had made progress, tracing the necklace to Kristen, a mysterious woman whose connections to Caleb raised suspicions. Delroy assured Kate that he would uncover the truth, but his confidence did little to quell her anxiety. The trial continued, and the courtroom became a stage for a complex dance between justice and personal conflict. Witness testimonies painted Caleb as a troubled but well-meaning young man, while the prosecution presented evidence linking him to a series of thefts. The jury watched intently, unaware of the silent battle waging within their judge. Kate's focus wavered with each passing day. The sight of Caleb, the necklace glinting in the fluorescent light, was a constant distraction. Memories of Louise became vivid, almost intrusive. She remembered the way her daughter laughed, the songs she loved to sing, and the dreams she had shared. Then came the turning point. Caleb's defense attorney, sensing Kate's unease, filed a motion questioning her ability to remain impartial. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the motion was discussed. Would Judge Kate admit her bias and step down? Kate took a deep breath before addressing the court. "Impartiality is the cornerstone of our legal system," she began, her voice steady but her heart racing. "However, I assure you that my focus remains on the evidence presented in this trial." Her words carried conviction, but inside, she knew the line between judge and mother had blurred beyond recognition. Outside the courtroom, Delroy's investigation took a darker turn. He discovered that Kristen was not just a pawn shop clerk, but a central figure in a network of individuals tied to missing persons cases. She had a history of operating under aliases and a penchant for disappearing when authorities closed in. As Delroy shared these findings with Kate, the weight of the situation became clearer. This was no longer about one necklace or one trial. It was about a web of deceit that had ensnared countless lives, including Louise's. Kate knew she had to tread carefully. Any misstep could jeopardize the trial and the investigation. But the mother in her refused to stay silent. She began to see Caleb not just as a defendant, but as a potential key to the mystery. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Kate approached Caleb's attorney during a recess. "Off the record," she began, her voice low and urgent. "I need to know where Caleb got that necklace." The attorney hesitated, clearly uneasy. "Judge, I can't compromise my client's defense," he replied. Frustrated but undeterred, Kate turned her attention back to the courtroom. Every testimony, every piece of evidence became a potential clue. The trial had transformed from a standard legal proceeding into a deeply personal quest for truth. As the days turned into weeks, tensions mounted. The jury grew restless. The media caught wind of the drama, and whispers of misconduct began to circulate. Kate found herself at the center of a storm she could neither control nor escape. One evening, as she reviewed court transcripts in her chambers, Delroy called with a breakthrough. "I've got something," he said, his tone grave. "Kristen isn't just connected to Caleb. She's been linked to cases spanning over a decade, including a ring that deals in stolen goods, and worse." The revelation sent a chill down Kate's spine. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was far darker than she had imagined. Caleb was no innocent pawn. He was tied to a larger, more sinister network. As the chapter closed, Kate stared out the window of her chambers, the city lights reflecting her inner turmoil. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but one thing was certain: she would not rest until she uncovered the truth, no matter the cost. In the next chapter, we'll delve into the arrival of Detective Delroy Idolo, whose relentless pursuit of justice brings new revelations to light. What secrets will he uncover, and how will they reshape the story? Stay tuned as the mystery deepens and the stakes rise. When Detective Delroy Idolo entered the picture, it was as though a fresh wind blew through the suffocating labyrinth of doubt and uncertainty surrounding the case. Delroy was a man of method and resolve, with a reputation for turning chaos into clarity. A tall, imposing figure, his sharp eyes and methodical demeanor made it clear that he was not one to be deterred by obstacles, no matter how daunting. From the moment he met Judge Kate, Delroy understood the gravity of the situation. This was not just a case of legal procedure or stolen jewelry. It was a saga of heartbreak and loss spanning a decade. He had read about Louise's disappearance in the old files, noting the dead ends and the unanswered questions that still haunted the investigation. But he also recognized something that others had overlooked: the necklace. Now at the center of this unfolding drama, had the potential to unravel truths buried for far too long. Delroy's first move was to dig into Caleb's past. His inquiries revealed a troubled young man whose life had been shaped by hardship. Caleb's journey through foster care, brushes with the law, and his involvement with a questionable circle of acquaintances painted a picture of vulnerability and desperation. But there was one detail that stood out like a beacon in the darkness: a pawn shop receipt linking Caleb to the enigmatic woman known as Kristen. Delroy visited the pawn shop, a dimly lit establishment nestled in a rundown part of the city. The shopkeeper, a wiry man with darting eyes, confirmed that Kristen had indeed pawned a necklace matching the description Kate had provided. However, she had left no trace of her identity beyond a fake name and an air of guarded secrecy. Delroy's instincts told him that Kristen was more than a bystander in this saga. She was a linchpin holding together threads of a larger conspiracy. Meanwhile, Kate struggled to maintain her composure in the courtroom. The trial's intensity had escalated, with Caleb's defense team mounting a robust argument against the charges. Yet, it wasn't the legal maneuvering that occupied Kate's thoughts. It was the mounting evidence that her daughter's disappearance was intertwined with Caleb's life in ways she could scarcely fathom. Delroy's investigation expanded, uncovering connections that defied coincidence. Caleb's associates included individuals tied to a series of disappearances spanning over a decade. The cases had been dismissed as unrelated, each one an isolated tragedy in a sea of urban despair. But Delroy saw a pattern, a chilling network of exploitation and secrecy that operated in the shadows, preying on the vulnerable. The detective's pursuit of Kristen intensified. He pored over surveillance footage, combed through records, and questioned anyone who had crossed paths with her. What emerged was a portrait of a woman skilled in deception, someone who thrived on the fringes of legality. Her ties to Caleb were murky, but one thing was clear: she knew more about the necklace and possibly Louise than she was letting on. In the courtroom, Caleb's behavior grew increasingly erratic. His once slouched posture stiffened, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. It was as if the weight of the trial and the presence of the necklace had begun to crack his facade. Kate watched him closely, her trained judicial eye catching every flicker of unease. Delroy decided it was time to confront Caleb directly. Meeting him in the confines of a police interrogation room, the detective laid out the evidence with surgical precision. "We know about the necklace," Delroy began, his voice steady but firm. "We know where it came from and the people you've been associating with. This isn't just about theft anymore. Caleb, it's about something much bigger. And you're in the middle of it." Caleb's response was a mixture of defiance and fear. He denied any knowledge of Kristen's activities, insisting that he had purchased the necklace from her without knowing its origins. But Delroy wasn't convinced. "You can play coy all you want," he said, leaning forward. "But the clock is ticking. If you don't start talking, you'll go down with the rest of them." The pressure began to take its toll. Caleb's resolve wavered, his voice trembling as he admitted to knowing more than he had initially revealed. He described meeting Kristen at a nightclub known for its shady clientele. She had offered him the necklace as collateral for a debt, swearing it had no connection to anything illegal. But Caleb's gut had told him otherwise, and now he found himself entangled in a web of deceit he couldn't escape. As Delroy relayed this information to Kate, her emotions swung between hope and despair. The trail was growing warmer, but it was also leading into dark, dangerous territory. Louise's name, once a painful whisper, was now being spoken aloud in the context of something far more sinister than a simple disappearance. Delroy's tenacity began to yield results. He uncovered links between Kristen and a network of individuals involved in trafficking and corruption. The necklace, far from being a mere piece of jewelry, was a token exchanged among those in the inner circle, a symbol of loyalty, power, and complicity. Its discovery in Caleb's possession was no accident. It was a thread that, when pulled, threatened to unravel the entire network. Kate faced a growing ethical dilemma. Her role as a judge required her to remain impartial, yet her heart demanded action. Could she continue presiding over the trial while privately pursuing the truth about Louise? Or would doing so compromise everything she had worked for? Delroy, sensing Kate's inner conflict, reassured her. "This isn't just about your daughter," he said. "It's about justice for her, for the others who've suffered, and for the truth that's been buried for too long. We'll get there, but we have to be smart about it." As the chapter drew to a close, the stakes had never been higher. Delroy's investigation was closing in on Kristen, but the danger was mounting. The shadowy figures behind the necklace's story would not relinquish their secrets easily. In the next chapter, we'll explore the enigmatic role of Kristen, a woman whose connections to Caleb and Louise's disappearance hold the key to unraveling this mystery. What are her true motives, and how far will she go to protect her secrets? Stay tuned as the story delves deeper into betrayal, corruption, and the quest for truth. Kristen was the kind of figure who left a lasting impression, though no one seemed to know her well enough to describe her in full. She moved like smoke through crowded rooms, her presence felt but never fully grasped. For years, she had eluded the radar of law enforcement, slipping through cracks in the system with a cunning that suggested she thrived on secrecy. But now, with Detective Delroy Idolo closing in, the shadows that had shielded her were beginning to lift. The clues leading to Kristen painted a picture of someone deeply entrenched in the underbelly of society. Her name appeared in pawnshop records, nightclub logs, and surveillance footage from obscure corners of the city. She was always connected to others who operated on the fringes, men and women whose lives were steeped in deception and crime. Yet, despite her apparent connections to illegal activities, Kristen had never been directly implicated in any wrongdoing. Delroy's investigation revealed that Kristen was more than a mere go-between for stolen goods. She was a master manipulator, someone who understood how to navigate complex networks of power and loyalty. Her ties to Caleb, while still unclear, suggested a deeper relationship, one that likely extended far beyond the simple exchange of a necklace. Kate, listening to Delroy's updates, felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. For the first time in years, she was closer to understanding what had happened to Louise. The name Kristen now occupied her thoughts, a new focal point in the search for answers. Who was this woman, and what did she know about the necklace, a piece of jewelry so intertwined with Kate's grief? As Delroy dug deeper, he discovered that Kristen had used multiple aliases over the years. She had lived in various cities, always under different names and identities, leaving behind a trail of mystery. One particularly chilling detail stood out. In each location where she had been active, cases of missing persons seemed to spike. Though no direct evidence linked her to these disappearances, the pattern was too consistent to ignore. Determined to find her, Delroy tracked down an old associate, a nightclub owner named Rico, who had once been a close confidant of Kristen. Rico was reluctant to talk, his fear evident in the way he glanced over his shoulder during their conversation. "Kristen doesn't just disappear," he said in a low voice. "She makes sure no one can follow her. If she knows you're looking for her, you'll regret it." But Rico couldn't resist Delroy's persistence. Eventually, he divulged a critical piece of information. Kristen was known to frequent an underground gambling den in the heart of the city. It was a place where deals were made, secrets traded, and loyalties tested, a perfect hiding spot for someone like her. The gambling den was everything Rico had described, a dimly lit, smoke-filled room where the stakes were high and trust was a commodity few could afford. Delroy entered cautiously, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. Amid the chaos of card games and whispered negotiations, he spotted her. Kristen was seated at a corner table, her posture relaxed but her eyes alert. She wore a confident smile, as if she had already calculated every possible outcome of the encounter. Delroy approached her with measured steps, his presence a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "Kristen," he said, his voice firm but calm. "We need to talk." She looked up, her expression unchanging. "Do we now?" She replied, her tone laced with amusement. "I don't believe we've met." Delroy didn't flinch. "You know why I'm here. Let's cut to the chase." He placed a photograph of the necklace on the table. "Where did you get this?" For the first time, Kristen's composure faltered. It was brief, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but Delroy caught it. She leaned back in her chair, regaining her poise. "That's a lovely piece," she said nonchalantly. but I'm afraid I can't help you." Delroy pressed on, his voice tinged with urgency. "This necklace was last seen on a young girl who disappeared 10 years ago. Her name was Louise, and I think you know exactly what happened to her." Kristen's smile faded. The name Louise seemed to hit a nerve, though she quickly masked her reaction. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Detective," she said, standing to leave. "I don't know anything about your missing girl." But Delroy wasn't about to let her walk away. He stepped in her path, his determination unshaken. "I'm not leaving without answers," he said, "and neither are you." The tension between them was palpable, drawing the attention of others in the room. Kristen, realizing she had no easy escape, agreed to talk, but only on her terms. "Fine," she said, "but not here. Meet me tomorrow, 8 p.m., at the old train yard. Come alone." Delroy agreed, though he knew better than to trust her entirely. The next evening, he arrived at the train yard, his instincts on high alert. True to her word, Kristen was there, waiting near an abandoned freight car. Their conversation was a delicate game of cat and mouse. Kristen revealed fragments of the truth, carefully omitting details that might incriminate her. She admitted to acquiring the necklace from someone within her network, but claimed she had no knowledge of its connection to Louise. Yet, as the conversation progressed, Delroy sensed that Kristen knew more than she was letting on. Her evasiveness only deepened his suspicion that she was hiding something significant, something that could break the case wide open. Meanwhile, Kate waited anxiously for updates, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew the investigation was inching closer to the truth, but the uncertainty was agonizing. Louise's memory loomed larger than ever, a beacon of hope and pain that guided her every decision. By the end of their meeting, Delroy had extracted enough information to advance the investigation, though Kristen's true motives remained a mystery. As he left the train yard, he couldn't shake the feeling that the game had just begun, and that Kristen held the cards they needed to uncover the full scope of the truth. In the next chapter, betrayal and long-buried secrets come to light as Caleb and Kristen's fragile alliance begins to unravel. What truths will emerge as the necklace becomes a symbol of broken trust? Stay tuned as the story plunges deeper into chaos and revelation. In the days following Delroy's tense encounter with Kristen, the case took on a new momentum, as if the weight of years of unanswered questions was finally starting to lift. Yet, with every step forward, new fractures appeared, exposing the fragile alliances and buried betrayals that had kept the truth hidden for so long. Caleb, who had maintained an air of quiet defiance throughout much of the trial, now seemed like a man on the brink of breaking. The pressure had been mounting steadily, and Kristen's name surfacing in the investigation added a layer of complexity he was ill-equipped to navigate. He had trusted her perhaps more than anyone else in his life, but now, faced with the prospect of her betrayal, Caleb's composure began to crumble. Delroy's interrogation techniques had chipped away at Caleb's defenses, revealing glimpses of a man who was more victim than villain. Under the hard exterior was someone who had been manipulated, coerced, and perhaps even threatened into the life he now found himself trapped in. And at the center of it all was Kristen, whose enigmatic role in his life had become both a source of hope and a cause for despair. The turning point came when Delroy presented Caleb with an ultimatum. "If you want any chance of getting out of this, you need to start talking," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "Whatever loyalty you think you owe Kristen, let me assure you, it's not mutual. She'll throw you under the bus the first chance she gets." Caleb's response was a mix of anger and resignation. "You don't know her like I do," he said, his voice tinged with both bitterness and longing. "She's done things for me that no one else ever would, but I can't shake the feeling that she's hiding something." With Delroy's guidance, Caleb began to unravel the threads of his relationship with Kristen. He recounted how they had met a chance encounter at a shelter, where she had offered him a way out of his dire circumstances. At the time, Caleb had seen her as a savior, someone who understood his pain and gave him purpose. But over the years, that dynamic had shifted. Kristen's influence became more controlling, her motives increasingly opaque. The necklace, as it turned out, was emblematic of their relationship, a symbol of trust that had now become a source of suspicion. Caleb admitted that Kristen had been evasive about its origins, dismissing his questions with vague assurances. "She said it didn't matter where it came from," he recalled. "But now I'm starting to think it matters more than anything." Meanwhile, Kate was grappling with her own revelations. The trial had taken a backseat to the emotional whirlwind unleashed by the discovery of the necklace. Each new piece of information brought her closer to the truth, but also closer to the painful reality that Louise's disappearance was part of something much darker than she had ever imagined. The courtroom, once a sanctuary of order and logic, had become a battleground for conflicting emotions. Kate's authority was being questioned, her impartiality scrutinized. Yet, through it all, she remained steadfast in her pursuit of justice, not just for Louise, but for all the families who had suffered similar losses. Delroy's investigation took a dramatic turn when he uncovered evidence of a financial link between Kristen and a network of illicit activities, including the trafficking of stolen goods and potentially people. Bank records revealed a series of transactions that tied her to individuals with known connections to organized crime. When confronted with this evidence, Kristen's response was as calculated as it was chilling. "You're digging into things you don't understand," she told Delroy, her voice calm but menacing. "There are people involved in this who won't hesitate to make you disappear if you keep pushing." But Delroy was undeterred. "Let them try," he replied, his resolve unshaken. "The truth is coming out, whether they like it or not." As the walls closed in on Kristen, her relationship with Caleb began to fracture irreparably. The trust they had built, however tenuous, was now eroding under the weight of lies and half-truths. Caleb, who had once defended her fiercely, found himself questioning everything. During a heated confrontation, Caleb demanded answers. "Why didn't you tell me about the necklace?" he shouted, his voice trembling with anger and hurt. "What else have you been hiding from me?" Kristen's response was cold and dismissive. "You wouldn't understand," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Some things are better left unsaid." But Caleb was no longer willing to accept her deflections. "I trusted you," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought you were helping me, but now I see you've been using me all along." The confrontation marked a turning point in their relationship, as Caleb began to distance himself from Kristen. For the first time, he saw her not as a protector, but as a manipulator, a woman whose motives were as murky as the secrets she guarded. Kate, too, was beginning to see the cracks in Kristen's facade. The courtroom drama, once centered on Caleb, was now shifting toward the larger conspiracy that Kristen represented. Each new revelation brought Kate closer to understanding the truth about Louise, but also closer to the realization that justice might come at a price. By the end of the chapter, the stage was set for an explosive confrontation. Kristen's carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling, exposing the fragility of her alliances and the depth of her deception. The necklace, once a simple token, had become a symbol of betrayal, a reminder that even the strongest bonds can be broken by secrets. In the next chapter, Delroy's investigation reveals unexpected connections that tie the necklace to a broader tragedy, linking Louise's disappearance to a network of victims and families searching for answers. What deeper truths will emerge as the story expands beyond the courtroom? Stay tuned as the narrative takes an even darker and more complex turn. The case had become a vortex of revelations, pulling everyone involved deeper into its labyrinth. What had started with a single necklace had now spiraled into a web of connections spanning years, people, and places. Delroy Italo's relentless investigation began uncovering threads that tied Louise's disappearance to a chilling pattern of unresolved tragedies, stories of other families, grappling with losses as inexplicable and devastating as Kate's. Delroy's breakthrough came in the form of an unassuming piece of evidence, a ledger discovered in Kristen's apartment, hidden within the hollow base of an antique lamp. The ledger was filled with cryptic entries, dates, initials, and coded symbols. Though it appeared meaningless at first glance, Delroy knew better. To the trained eye of an investigator, it was a treasure trove of clues. Using forensic techniques, Delroy and his team decoded the ledger. What emerged was a grim picture, a record of transactions tied to missing persons, Each entry correlated with a disappearance, many of which had gone cold without leads. The necklace, it seemed, was not an isolated token, but part of a broader scheme. Kate was devastated when Delroy shared the findings. Louise's name wasn't explicitly listed, but the dates and locations suggested a horrifying possibility. Her disappearance was connected to a network of abductions orchestrated by individuals who viewed human lives as commodities. For Kate, the discovery was both a breakthrough and a crushing blow. The ledger's implications were staggering, linking Louise's story to dozens of others. Each entry represented a family haunted by unanswered questions, a life stolen without explanation. In the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. Caleb, once the focal point of the trial, now seemed like a mere pawn in a game far larger than anyone had imagined. His testimony became increasingly vital, not for his defense, but for the light it could shed on the network Kristen had been part of. Caleb's revelations painted a grim picture of his life under Kristen's influence. He described how she had recruited him as a teenager, offering him stability and belonging in exchange for unquestioning loyalty. Over time, her requests grew darker, delivering packages, avoiding questions, and eventually acting as a courier for items like the necklace. "She told me it was just jewelry," Caleb confessed during a closed-door interview with Delroy. "But every time I asked where it came from, she'd shut me down. She said it was better not to know." Delroy pressed him further. "Do you remember anything unusual about the people you delivered to? Anything that stood out?" Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "There was one guy," he said. "Real sharp dresser, but his eyes, something about them wasn't right. I saw him arguing with Kristen once. He mentioned something about tying up loose ends. That's when I started getting scared." The description matched a name Delroy had encountered in his research: a man with ties to organized crime and suspected involvement in trafficking operations. This connection provided a critical link between Kristen's ledger and the larger network Delroy had been piecing together. Meanwhile, Kate found herself reflecting on the broader implications of the case. Each new discovery brought Louise's memory into sharper focus. She thought of the other families whose stories were now intertwined with her own. How many mothers had waited by the phone, hoping for news that never came? How many fathers had searched streets and forests, clinging to the hope that their child might still be found? Her role as a judge had always been to uphold the law, but now she was confronted with its limitations. Justice, she realized, was not just about verdicts and sentences. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how painful or inconvenient. In a moment of clarity, Kate reached out to the families of other missing persons whose cases were linked to the ledger. She organized a private meeting, bringing them together to share their stories and offer mutual support. The gathering was a powerful testament to resilience and community, as strangers united by shared grief found solace in each other's experiences. One mother, Maria, spoke of her son, Miguel, who had vanished at the age of 14. "For years I thought I was alone," she said, her voice trembling. "But now I see that our stories are connected. Maybe together we can find the answers we've been searching for." Delroy, moved by the family's courage, vowed to continue his pursuit of justice. His investigation took him to places he had never imagined: hidden warehouses, offshore bank accounts, and shadowy figures who operated beyond the reach of conventional law. Each step brought him closer to understanding the full scope of the network, but also closer to danger. One night, as Delroy reviewed his findings, he received an anonymous tip. The voice on the other end of the line was distorted, but the message was clear: "You're getting too close. Back off, or you'll regret it." Undeterred, Delroy doubled down on his efforts, enlisting the help of trusted allies within law enforcement. Together, they began coordinating a sting operation to dismantle the network and bring its members to justice. For Kate, the road ahead was equally fraught with challenges. As the trial neared its conclusion, she faced mounting pressure to maintain her composure and deliver a fair verdict. Yet, beneath her judicial exterior, she grappled with the emotional weight of the revelations surrounding Louise. By the chapter's end, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align. The necklace, once a symbol of loss, had become a catalyst for justice, but the journey was far from over. The deeper they delved, the more dangerous the path became, with powerful forces determined to keep their secrets buried. In the next chapter, Kate faces an impossible choice as her roles as a judge and a mother collide. Will she prioritize her duty to the law, or will she risk everything to uncover the truth about her daughter? Stay tuned as the story explores the ethical dilemmas and emotional conflicts that define the human spirit. The courtroom had always been a sanctuary of order for Judge Kate, a place where rules were clear and decisions, though difficult, were guided by precedent and evidence. But as the trial of Caleb continued, that sanctuary began to feel like a cage. With every gavel strike, Kate wrestled with a growing conflict: her duty as a judge versus her desperation as a mother. The case had reached a critical juncture. Delroy's discoveries had broadened the scope far beyond Caleb's actions, implicating Kristen and her network in a web of corruption and human suffering. The necklace, once thought to be a simple piece of evidence, was now the centerpiece of a broader conspiracy. And yet, the immediate trial was still about Caleb, whose involvement in the network remained murky. In private moments, Kate questioned her ability to remain impartial. Her judicial oath demanded objectivity, but the mother in her longed for action, for resolution, for answers about Louise. Each time she locked eyes with Caleb in the courtroom, she couldn't help but wonder if he held the key to the truth she had been searching for all these years. The trial grew more intense as the defense presented its case. Caleb's attorney argued that his client was a victim of circumstance, manipulated by figures like Kristen into a life he had little control over. They painted Caleb as a young man who had been exploited by a system that preyed on the vulnerable. The prosecution, however, presented evidence that linked Caleb to a series of petty crimes and transactions involving stolen goods. While his direct involvement in the broader network was unproven, his proximity to Kristen and her operations cast a long shadow of doubt. The jury sat in quiet contemplation as the arguments unfolded. For them, the trial was about Caleb's guilt or innocence. For Kate, it was about something far more personal. One evening, as Kate reviewed the day's proceedings in her chambers, Delroy arrived with a troubling update. The sting operation targeting Kristen's network had been compromised. Someone within law enforcement had leaked information, giving the conspirators time to scatter and cover their tracks. "This is bigger than we thought," Delroy said, his frustration evident. "We're dealing with people who have resources, connections. They're willing to do whatever it takes to protect themselves." Kate's heart sank. The prospect of justice felt further away than ever. She had pinned so much hope on Delroy's investigation, and now it seemed the forces they were up against were more powerful than she had imagined. Delroy, however, refused to back down. "We're not giving up," he said firmly. "We've still got leads, and I'm not about to let these people slip away." His determination reignited Kate's resolve, but it also underscored the moral dilemmas she faced. Could she continue presiding over Caleb's trial, knowing how deeply entwined it was with her own personal quest for answers? Or would recusing herself be the only ethical course of action? The turning point came when Caleb took the stand in his own defense. His testimony was raw, emotional, and riddled with contradictions. He spoke of his troubled upbringing, his admiration for Kristen, and the choices he regretted. But when questioned about the necklace, his composure faltered. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was just something she gave me to hold on to. I didn't know it would lead to all this." Kate's grip tightened on the gavel as she listened. She wanted to ask him more, to push for answers about Louise, but she knew she couldn't. The rules of the courtroom bound her, even as her heart screamed for justice. As the trial progressed, the tension in the courtroom became palpable. Every witness testimony, every piece of evidence felt like another thread in a web that was slowly unraveling. The jury seemed increasingly torn, their faces a mixture of empathy and skepticism. Outside the courtroom, Kate continued to grapple with her dual roles. Her evenings were spent poring over Louise's case files, her mind racing with possibilities. She thought of the other families Delroy had uncovered, their stories intertwined with hers in ways she was only beginning to understand. One sleepless night, Kate sat in Louise's room, her fingers tracing the edges of a photograph. It was a picture of Louise at a birthday party, her smile radiant, the necklace glinting in the sunlight. The memory was bittersweet, a reminder of what had been lost, but also of the hope that still flickered. The next day, Kate made a decision. During a private meeting with the court's oversight board, she disclosed her personal connection to the case. "I have done everything in my power to remain impartial," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "But I cannot ignore the fact that this case touches on my own personal tragedy. I leave it to the board to determine whether I should continue presiding." The board deliberated and ultimately decided that Kate could remain on the case, citing her transparency and the absence of any evidence of bias in her rulings. The decision was both a relief and a burden. Kate now carried the weight of knowing that her role in the trial was under constant scrutiny. As the chapter closed, the stakes had reached a boiling point. Caleb's fate, the future of the investigation, and the lingering questions about Louise were all hanging in the balance. Kate's struggle for control, both over the courtroom and her own emotions, was far from over. In the next chapter, a shocking revelation will tie Kristen to a larger scheme, forcing Caleb to confront the truth about his involvement and pushing Kate to the brink of a decision that could change everything. Stay tuned as the story builds to its most intense and emotional moments yet. The atmosphere in the courtroom had grown heavier with each passing day, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on everyone. For weeks, the trial had been a crucible of emotions, evidence, and unanswered questions. But no one could have anticipated the explosive revelation that would soon change everything. Delroy Idolo, ever the determined investigator, arrived at the courthouse one morning with a file in hand and a look of grim satisfaction. He had uncovered a vital piece of evidence, a surveillance recording that tied Kristen directly to a chilling scheme of orchestrated disappearances and corruption. The footage, grainy but undeniable, showed Kristen meeting with high-profile figures, exchanging envelopes and subtle nods that spoke volumes about the power dynamics at play. The most startling detail, however, was the presence of a man wearing a police badge, a direct link to the compromised sting operation and a betrayal that cut deep. This revelation confirmed what Delroy had long suspected. The network extended into the justice system itself. Kate was reviewing her notes in chambers when Delroy burst in. "You need to see this," he said, placing the file on her desk. His voice was steady, but the urgency in his eyes was unmistakable. Kate flipped through the documents and froze when she saw the still image of Kristen meeting with the badge-wearing man. Her mind raced. This wasn't just about Caleb, Kristen, or even Louise anymore. It was about systemic corruption that had allowed these atrocities to persist for years. Delroy's findings added new dimensions to the case. He explained that Kristen had been a key player in a network that abducted vulnerable individuals and laundered their identities for illegal purposes. The necklace, once thought to be a simple trinket, was actually a marker used to signify victims within the scheme. But there was more. Buried within the new evidence was a ledger entry that directly referenced Louise, listing her name alongside a date and location. It was a damning connection that placed her disappearance squarely within the timeline of Kristen's activities. For Kate, the discovery was both devastating and galvanizing. Louise's name on that ledger was the closest thing to an answer she had received in 10 years. But it also meant facing the horrifying reality that her daughter had been targeted, not by chance, but as part of a calculated operation. In the courtroom, tensions reached a breaking point when the prosecution introduced Delroy's findings as evidence. Caleb, visibly shaken, sat with his head in his hands as the implications sank in. The jury listened intently as the prosecution detailed the network's operations, painting a picture of corruption, exploitation, and human suffering. Kristen's role was laid bare. She had been more than a facilitator. She was an orchestrator, someone who understood the system's vulnerabilities and exploited them with ruthless efficiency. The defense scrambled to distance Caleb from her activities, arguing that he had been a pawn in her schemes. As the evidence mounted, Caleb's facade cracked. He requested to speak privately with his attorney and Delroy, claiming he had information that could change the course of the trial. What he revealed was shocking. Caleb admitted that Kristen had confided in him about her role in Louise's disappearance, though he claimed he had been too afraid to come forward. According to Caleb, Kristen had mentioned Louise by name during one of their arguments, referring to her as a loose end that needed to be dealt with. This revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. For Kate, it was the confirmation she had both dreaded and hoped for, a direct link between Kristen and her daughter. The grief she had carried for years threatened to overwhelm her, but she knew she couldn't afford to lose control. The final confrontation came during Kristen's arrest. Delroy, armed with the evidence he had gathered, led a team to apprehend her at a hidden safe house. Kristen's demeanor was as composed as ever, her expression unreadable as officers placed her in handcuffs. "You think you've won?" she said to Delroy, her voice calm and eerily confident. "This is bigger than you can imagine. Taking me down won't change a thing." But Delroy wasn't deterred. "We'll see about that," he replied, his resolve unshaken. The trial concluded with a verdict that was both satisfying and bittersweet. Caleb, whose testimony had been instrumental in exposing Kristen's network, received a reduced sentence. The jury found him guilty of the charges against him but acknowledged his cooperation and the mitigating circumstances of his involvement. Kristen, however, faced a far harsher fate. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her unrepentant demeanor during sentencing sealed her fate. She was convicted on multiple counts, including conspiracy, trafficking, and accessory to abduction. For Kate, the end of the trial marked the beginning of a new chapter. The truth about Louise had been partially uncovered, but questions remained. Where was her daughter now? Was she still alive? The investigation into the larger network continued, with Delroy at the helm, determined to bring the remaining perpetrators to justice. As Kate left the courthouse on the final day of the trial, she paused on the steps, looking out at the bustling city. The necklace, now stored as evidence, had become more than a symbol of pain. It was a testament to resilience, hope, and the enduring fight for justice. In the next chapter, Delroy dives deeper into the interconnected cases, uncovering startling truths that could bring long-awaited closure to the families of the missing. How far will the pursuit of justice go, and what risks will it entail? Stay tuned as the story delves into the pursuit of truth amid chaos and danger. The case against Kristen might have concluded in the courtroom, but for Detective Delroy Idolo and Judge Kate, the real battle had just begun. The verdict had torn the veil off a sprawling network of corruption and abduction, but its full extent remained buried under layers of secrecy. With Kristen behind bars and Caleb's limited knowledge exhausted, the pursuit of truth demanded more than ever before a deeper dive into the shadows, where every step forward carried its own risks. Delroy's first priority was to dismantle the network's infrastructure. The ledger found in Kristen's possession had been invaluable, but it was incomplete. Each entry hinted at connections to offshore accounts, false identities, and locations across the country. The investigation expanded into uncharted territory, requiring collaboration with federal agencies, tech experts, and international law enforcement. Kate, though no longer directly involved in the investigation, couldn't step away entirely. Her position as a judge gave her unique access to resources, and her personal stake in the case made her a quiet yet driving force behind the scenes. She attended meetings with victim advocacy groups, reached out to other families who had been affected, and worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. One family, the Patels, had lost their daughter Mira, under circumstances eerily similar to Louise's disappearance. They shared a story of unanswered questions and police indifference, but also one of resilience and determination. Their connection to Kate brought a sense of solidarity to a fight that had long felt isolating. As Delroy and his team dug deeper, they uncovered startling patterns. The network, it seemed, operated like a corporation, complete with hierarchies, funding streams, and a strict code of silence. Every loose end, like Louise, represented a risk to the organization, one that was often eliminated without hesitation. Delroy's pursuit led him to a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town, where Kristen's associates had once operated. Inside, they found traces of recent activity scraps of paper, discarded cell phones, and a locked safe that contained files on potential targets. The chilling detail was that many of the names listed were people who had never been reported missing, suggesting that the network had been preparing for its next wave of operations. The discovery was a grim reminder of the stakes involved. Each name on that list represented a life that could still be saved, but also a ticking clock for Delroy and his team. The network wasn't just a relic of the past, it was an ongoing threat, evolving and adapting to evade capture. As the investigation gained traction, so did the danger. Delroy received anonymous threats, cryptic phone calls, and emails warning him to back off. His team faced similar pressures, from smear campaigns in the media to sudden withdrawals of support from certain officials. The deeper they delved, the more it became clear that the network's influence reached into places no one had anticipated. For Kate, the chaos of the investigation mirrored the emotional turmoil she faced at home. The discovery of Louise's name in Kristen's ledger had answered some questions, but raised countless others. She found herself oscillating between hope and despair, unable to rest until every piece of the puzzle was uncovered. One sleepless night, Kate revisited Louise's room, now filled with case files and notes from the trial. Her eyes landed on a journal Louise had kept as a teenager. Flipping through its pages, she found an entry that stopped her cold. "Mom always tells me to stay away from strangers, but sometimes I think she's wrong. There are good people out there, people who might help me see the world differently. Maybe someday I'll meet someone like that." The entry was dated just a week before Louise disappeared. It was a haunting reminder of her daughter's innocence, her curiosity, and the cruel way those qualities had been exploited. Meanwhile, Delroy's relentless pursuit led to a breakthrough. One of Kristen's former associates, a man named Lucas, had been apprehended during a sting operation in another city. Lucas, facing a lengthy prison sentence, agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. His testimony revealed critical details about the network's operations, including a key meeting place where decisions were made. The location was a nondescript motel off a highway, a place no one would look at twice. Delroy and his team staked it out, waiting for the right moment to move in. The operation was high stakes. Any mistake could tip off the remaining members of the network and send them deeper into hiding. When the raid finally occurred, it was swift and decisive. Several suspects were apprehended, and the evidence recovered included financial records, communication logs, and even video footage of meetings where targets were discussed. The operation was a significant blow to the network, but it came with a cost. One suspect, desperate to avoid capture, detonated a small explosive device hidden in the room. The blast caused minimal physical damage but destroyed critical evidence and injured one of Delroy's officers. It was a stark reminder of how far the network was willing to go to protect itself. As the chapter came to a close, the investigation was at a tipping point. Delroy had struck a major blow, but the network was far from dismantled. The pursuit of truth had become a race against time, with lives hanging in the balance and powerful enemies determined to maintain their grip on secrecy. Kate, standing at her window and looking out over the city, knew that the fight was far from over. But she also knew that they were closer than ever to uncovering the full truth about Louise and ensuring that no other family would have to endure the same pain. In the next chapter, the story reaches its climax as devastating secrets come to light, forcing Kate, Delroy, and the other families to confront the full scope of the network's crimes. How will the final pieces of the puzzle fall into place? And what price will be paid for justice? Stay tuned as the narrative builds to its powerful and emotional. The final days of the investigation were marked by a crescendo of revelations, each more shocking than the last. The network's intricacy had become clear. It was a labyrinth of betrayal, greed, and cruelty that spanned far beyond anything Kate or Delroy had imagined. Delroy's persistence had uncovered the identities of several key players within the organization. Among them was a name that stunned everyone involved, a prominent philanthropist whose public persona had been a facade, masking years of complicity in the network's crimes. The philanthropist, known for their charitable work with at-risk youth, had used their influence to shield the network from scrutiny and silence anyone who got too close to the truth. This revelation struck a nerve with Kate. It was a bitter reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that even those who seemed to champion justice could be complicit in the worst kinds of evil. The final confrontation took place in a courtroom, but not the one where Caleb's trial had unfolded. This time, it was a federal trial, with Delroy presenting the full scope of the network's crimes. Evidence was laid bare: financial records, communications, and the ledger that had initially broken the case wide open. The gallery was packed with families of the missing, their faces a mixture of anguish and hope. Kate sat among them, her presence both symbolic and personal. She was no longer there as a judge, but as a mother who had waited 10 long years for answers. The testimonies were harrowing. Lucas, the former associate who had turned informant, described in chilling detail how the network operated. He spoke of how they identified targets, manipulated their vulnerabilities, and ensured their silence. But most heart-wrenching of all was his admission about Louise. Louise was different, Lucas said, his voice trembling. She wasn't like the others. She fought back, asked questions, refused to give up hope. I didn't want to be part of what happened to her, but I was too afraid to stand up to them. His words pierced Kate's heart, but they also gave her a glimmer of solace. Louise's spirit, her resilience, had endured even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. The courtroom grew silent as the prosecution presented its final piece of evidence: a video recording recovered from the raid on the motel. The footage showed a clandestine meeting where Louise's name was mentioned, her defiance described as a problem that needed to be addressed. For Kate, the video was both a curse and a gift. It confirmed her worst fears, but also validated her decade-long quest for the truth. As the recording played, she felt tears streaming down her face, but she also felt an unshakable resolve. The trial concluded with a series of convictions. The philanthropist, Kristen, and several other key figures were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. But for Kate and the other families, the end of the trial was not the end of their journey. In the weeks that followed, Kate found herself reflecting on the lessons of the past 10 years. She had learned that justice was not always swift or simple, but that it was worth pursuing, no matter how daunting the path. She had seen the strength of community, the way families united by grief could become a force for change. Delroy, too, had been transformed by the case. He had always been a man of determination, but this investigation had shown him the depths of human resilience and the power of truth. In his final report, he wrote, "Justice is not about erasing pain. It is about acknowledging it, confronting it, and ensuring that those who cause it are held accountable. It is about restoring hope, even in the darkest of times." Kate's work was far from over. She became an advocate for families of the missing, using her experience to push for reforms in how such cases were handled. She established a foundation in Louise's name, dedicated to supporting investigations, raising awareness, and offering resources to families in need. The necklace, once a symbol of despair, now sat in a display case at the foundation's office. It was a reminder of the journey they had undertaken, a journey marked by loss, but also by courage and perseverance. As Kate stood before a group of supporters at the foundation's opening ceremony, she spoke words that resonated deeply with everyone present. Today, we honor the ones we've lost, but we also celebrate the strength it takes to fight for them. Justice is a journey, not a destination. And though it may take time, every step brings us closer to the truth. Her speech was met with a standing ovation, the crowd united by a shared sense of purpose. Among them was Delroy, his presence a testament to the collaboration that had made their victory possible. For Kate, the road ahead remained uncertain, but she faced it with renewed hope. Louise's story had become part of something greater, a movement that would ensure no family would ever have to endure such loss alone. As we conclude this journey, let us reflect on the power of truth, justice, and resilience. What lessons can we carry forward in our own lives? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories that inspire and challenge us to be better. Together, we can create a world where every voice matters and every life is valued.